Stay with us here on World Insight. Still to come on the program. Hope for a breather in China-U.S. trade tensions with Xi from G20 meeting. What does it mean for U.S. businesses in China? We'll talk to a top American business executive right after this break. Welcome back. You're watching World Insight. I'm Tian Wei. The program is coming to you on CGTN. The recent phone conversation between Chinese President Xi Jinping and U.S. President Donald Trump has given hope to prospects that the two countries can be working together to discuss the way forward, at least at the G20 meeting later this year. China's policy is to stick to reform and opening up, as demonstrated by the first International Import Expo in Shanghai. Despite the ongoing trade tension between China and the U.S., nearly 200 American firms took part in the expo. Earlier, I met Kenneth Jarrett, the president of AmCham in Shanghai. We discussed the optimism among businesses amid the uncertainty. Ken, welcome to CGTN.
Nice to see you here in Shanghai.
Good to see you in Shanghai, finally.
Right.
Yeah. China-U.S. trade relationship. Many wonder whether this import expo is going to send any positive message to that troublesome, to say the least, trade relations.
Well, we hope so. And it could send different kinds of messages, because at the very least, it is an import expo, and we hope that it does result in more sales by U.S. companies, many of whom are here at the expo. Well over 100 U.S. companies will be exhibiting. But in many ways, the lasting significance of the expo, if it's going to have lasting significance, will be a function of what President Xi announces in his remarks, in his speech. And we do hope that he says something about market access issues for companies, and this will allow the U.S. and other foreign companies to sell more into China every day, and they don't actually have to wait for an expo. But it is something that the expo itself is something our members welcome, and it is an opportunity for them in a very efficient way meet with potential customers from across China, because every provincial leader in China, it seems, is here in Shanghai for this, and I believe that they are all eager to demonstrate that China is no longer just the manufacturing capital of the world that exports a lot, but is also a big import country.
We noticed that this time the U.S. administration has refused to send any official delegation. Given the fact of the enthusiasm among the members of your organization, the American companies, there seems to be diverse directions that the business community and the current administration are going.
Well, I would say, for a business show, there's of course a lot of pageantry associated with this show in Shanghai, but you don't actually need to have a lot of business, you don't have to have a lot of government officials to have a successful business show, because most business exhibits or shows that take place in China are mainly attended by company executives, and that's really the key. In China, this particular exposition does have a lot of political importance attached to it, and President Xi is here, and you have other leaders from around the world. But I would say that, in fact, the key to the success will be the interaction among the business leaders as opposed to the government leaders.
But extended from this question is a bigger question regarding the relationship between the U.S. business community and the current administration. With the debates about the World Trade Organization and the U.S. role differently this time by the current administration, with different kinds of trade mechanism, whether it should only be bilateral, which is the current administration's advocating, vis-a-vis multi-players of trade mechanism and platforms, and with regards to the ways of doing business, for example, using tariffs or not, it seems that there have been different layers from strategic to international and to even the technique of using measures and policies, there have been very different perspectives coming from the American business perspective and the U.S. administration so far. So Ken, help us to understand what exactly is this picture. Are we going to hear constantly very different messages from both sides? Are we going to see a very different approach between the U.S. business community, particularly the established business community, and the current administration? How should China reconcile between these two?
Well, I think you pointed to a useful structure in terms of how to understand what's taking place, because it's true that
within the U.S. side,
right, you know, that within the American business community, there's been no secret about the fact that many business associations, including AmCham Shanghai, has been opposed to the use of retaliatory tariffs as a way to bring about change. But
it does hurt your members.
Yes. But we need to focus on, so there's a question of ends and the question of means. So here I would say that, so if there's any difference of view between, let's say, our members and the Trump administration, it would be more on the means. But we do feel that the Trump administration is focused on concerns that have been on the minds of our members for a very long time. And these would be, I mean, intellectual property rights is in our annual surveys always very high on the list of the regulatory obstacles that our members face.
But also many wonder, Ken, whether the current administration is taking advantage of what you call the ends for their own political ends, rather than the real goals of the business community.
Well, for me, it's hard to, I guess, represent the Trump administration in terms of what its ends
Not
are.
at all.
Right. But for the business community, for us, we are, so our focus would be on changes that allow improved market access, because, I could run through a list of things that are, that have long-standing complaints.
Right,
but this has been stated many times. And then there are aspects of China's industrial policies that we feel are unfair to foreign companies. That also is a familiar complaint.
Right.
And that's why, and these are things that are very much on the minds of the administration. So perhaps what you're pointing at is then what seems to be taking the basket of economic and commercial issues, and it's getting thrown in with lots of other differences between the U.S. and China. And there does seem to be a tension that's building across the board that includes some of the political security issues, whether South China Seas or other things. Or
are you concerned about that?
Well,
the apparent spillover effect.
Well, so we would be, but any kind of regional hotspot is potentially a risk to our members. Of course, if you have some connection between what would be viewed maybe mainly as a commercial dispute with a political dispute, particularly over a sovereignty or territorial issue, this is what becomes more explosive. And we've seen examples of this in the case of South Korea or the Philippines or even Japan.
For a long time, trade and economic ties between the two countries have been the stabilizing factor, and very much the stabilizing factor, play a strategic role. On the one hand, this role has been undergoing a stress test. On the other hand, you see the debates about the other issues, as you mentioned earlier, are becoming much more in vision. So, as a result of this, will the reality that already the hurt trade and economic ties be further marginalized as a result, and further hurt the bilateral relations, which is an overall vicious cycle that I'm talking about, be a possibility? And to business community, have you ever thought about that?
So it is a possibility, and I can explain a bit more. But first, I would want to emphasize your first point, which is the role that economic and commercial ties have played in terms of stabilizing relationship, particularly at times of tension. So
you don't want to think about the second point?
No, I will come back to the second point, but particularly it's often called the ballast, that keeps the relationship stable. And that's a very productive role, and I think one that can continue into the future, because there are many ways that the two economies are still complementary and can interact to a very deep degree. The reason I would say that we do need to be mindful of a change, which is if you think back 10 years ago in terms of the complementarity of the economies, there actually wasn't that much overlap in the middle because China was doing lower-end manufacturing and maybe the U.S. was at the upper end. And now China has moved very rapidly up the value-added chain, and the areas of focus of the two economies are meeting very much in the middle. And this is why we are seeing this greater friction, particularly on technology issues. So all of the emerging technologies are areas where China and the U.S. are, to a degree, competing to be the world's leader in these areas, which does mean that moving forward, you'll have more of this competition. And competition itself can be natural. It doesn't necessarily mean you'll be an adversary, but there will be.
But it could be.
There's greater possibility for the competition to become tense as well. If in the United States there is a concern about China's growing technological powers, and you sense this in the Vice President's recent speech in U.S.-China relations. And that it does mean that the U.S. government will be more attentive to what the private sector is doing in China, as well as what China is allowed to buy in the United States or invest in the United States out of genuine national security concerns.
But there's always the action and reaction, isn't it? The action could be from the administration and from the policymakers. But the administration is there for 4 years, probably 8 years. But the question is, what about the reaction coming from the other sides of the American society, business community included? Of course, there are different divisions within the business community as well. That's just a reality. Some are having more benefits in the bilateral relation, good one. Others are having less, if not worse. So, how do you see that about this part, that the short term vis-a-vis the long term?
Well, the key is to keep in mind that the business community thinks long term. And that's very much. Yes, absolutely. And as the business community looks at opportunities in China, and I've been speaking to our members constantly over the last couple of months about the current trade tensions and try to understand, are there any changes in terms of long-term investment plans and decisions, or how they see the China market. And I'm quite confident in saying that for our members, they do feel that there are very significant macro trends here that make China attractive to them, and that they have no desire to leave. So for the business community, and you can take the import exposition as an example. The U.S. government is not here in force, but I would say that there's a very sizable representation from the U.S. business community. There are, according to the Ministry of Commerce from China, 180 U.S. exhibitors, which out of the 3,000, is quite a sizable chunk of exhibitors.
Action and inaction could also be a reality for the future. And what would that mean if the business community, besides routinely, quote-unquote, speaking out, without real actions or concerted actions in regards to the current policies, tariffs included, coming from the current administration, what's going to be the long-term impact? I mean, let's just face it, businesses are very pragmatic. If they do not have to speak out, they don't speak out. If they can save their energy, they will use their energy somewhere else. They want to avoid conflicts with any administration because it's not going to be good for their benefits. So are we going to see an apparent appeasement in a way from the American business community regarding what the current administration is doing about the long-term future of what you see? But on the other hand, are we going to see just a few players speaking out? For example, Apple, Starbucks, some of the biggest multinationals, while the other businesses, while the other members of the business community are thinking differently. I want to get the temperature check from you, Ken.
Well, I don't think that the American business community has been passive for the last couple of months. If you look at all of these submissions to the U.S. Trade Representative, or when they had the hearings on the 200 billion tariffs, it was originally scheduled, I think, for 2 days, but they had to go for 5 days because they had so many people who wished to testify. And the testimony was mainly critical of what the administration was planning on doing.
But they didn't turn back the clock.
Correct. So I think the
Does
best...
it mean the business community in the U.S. now is much weaker than it used to be when it comes to its capability of communicating?
Well, I think to some degree the administration feels that the business community actually has been enabling China's economic development, and this is something that they would like to slow down in the areas of technology. So there is a shift in the relationship a bit between the administration and the business community. But the best way really to strengthen and enable the business community would be for China to take some dramatic steps that therefore would allow the business community with much more credibility to go to the administration and say that significant changes are taking place and that the administration should sit down with China and to negotiate a path out of the current tensions.
There were, from China's perspective, earlier negotiations. And those negotiations was almost quite positive between the Chinese negotiation team and the U.S. negotiation team representing the current administration, but it didn't work out even after some of the critical meetings. So it seems that one party of the negotiation is very much afraid that the other party is just not going to abide by the words, not even mention the actions.
Well, at the moment, I guess, of course, we're outside observers to all of this.
Of course. There are a lot of things going on that we might not be aware of.
But until, of course, we have the recent phone call between the two leaders, and that suggests some improvement in the atmosphere. But I would agree that in the last sort of month or two, that it doesn't seem that either government is in a rush to negotiate, for each one has separate reasons. I think in the case of the United States government, they feel that they have the upper hand and that the longer this process drags out, that they will get sort of more from China. In the case of China, they take the position that they don't want to negotiate under the threat of more tariffs, and that the U.S. hasn't shown sort of the right attitude or approach to the negotiation. So you've had a bit of a stalemate, and everyone is waiting eagerly to see what happens in Argentina, at the G20, to see if this marks some kind of a turn in the atmosphere, at least. I don't think, from our perspective, we're not looking for a dramatic breakthrough. I think a reasonable and actually would be very positive outcome would be at least a declaration of a moratorium on tariffs and the start of a process to sort out what a solution could look like.
Right. Before we go, Ken, I have to ask, is also a caution note. How much danger is there that as time goes by, the real fabric of this bilateral relations will be further hurt? The already limited amount of mutual trust will be further lessened. And as a result of that, is there any possibility that things could get better?
Well, here I think it's important for us always to be positive or optimistic.
Oh, yes. On the one hand, yes, but...
Well, even if I think in my own case, because I first came to Shanghai in 1979, so I've been in and out of China almost for 40 years. And in the 40 years, so there have been a number of ups and downs. Definitely we're in a down cycle at the moment, but we have recovered in the past. And what's important then to analyze would be, are we entering a new sort of period in terms of U.S.-China relations in which it'll be characterized more by a greater sense of rivalry or this tension as opposed to what we've seen in the past. But I don't think it's a foregone conclusion. It will take enlightened leadership on both sides for the two governments, for the business communities, for people to argue and highlight the important areas of cooperation that are essential. So in that sense, we can all be nationalists and globalists at the same time, because in fact we do.
Can we?
I think we can, right? Because there are certain global issues that if we don't address them, they'll be damaging to each country. So it won't be of any use to be a nationalist if you're not working at least on a global level.
And that is all the time we have for today. If you'd like to see more, try to find us World Insight CGTN into your search engine or check out our YouTube channel. You can also follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Sina Weibo. From me, Tian Wei, and everyone on the World Insight team, thanks for watching. Tune in again next time for insights across China and around the world. Good night.